The night taught me something I still haven't forgiven myself for learning. That relief can look exactly like salvation right up until the moment it leads you somewhere you were never meant to go. My name is Ethan Rowe. I was 37 that winter, old enough to trust my routines, young enough to believe they still protected me. I'd been living out of a beat-up Volkswagen camper for almost 3 years by then, drifting between contracts, temporary work, quiet towns where no one asked why you stayed as long as you paid on time and didn't make trouble. Musoni wasn't supposed to be a stop. It was just where the snow decided to stop me. I'd parked the van near the edge of town, close enough to the clinic where I worked night maintenance, far enough from the rail line that the passing freight wouldn't shake the cabinets loose. January in Musni doesn't arrive. It seals itself around you. The cold isn't sharp. It's heavy. It presses. It makes the air feel thick, like you're breathing through layers of wool. That night, the storm had already been whispering since sunset, wind pushing snow sideways, not violently, just persistently, like it was trying to erase things gently instead of all at once. By midnight, visibility was down to a few feet. The kind of whiteout where the world feels unfinished, like you're standing inside a blank page. I should have stayed put. That was the rule I'd lived by. Don't drive in whiteouts. Don't trust fresh tracks unless you saw them being made. Don't assume help is coming just because you want it to. But rules get softer when you're tired, and I was exhausted in a way that lived behind my eyes. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from the clinic. A nurse named Marlene, night shift, short-staffed, stuck after a late emergency intake. She needed a ride home. Her car wouldn't start, and the plows were supposed to be running. I remember sitting there in the driver's seat, engine idling, heater rattling like loose bones. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle, smearing snow into dull arcs. I told myself it was simple, a short drive, familiar roads. I'd done worse in worse conditions. The first thing that changed my mind wasn't courage. It was sound. Somewhere beyond the van, buried under the wind, I heard the low, grinding growl of a diesel engine. Steady. Purposeful. The unmistakable rhythm of a snowplow working its way through the dark. Relief settled into my chest so fast it felt like warmth. Fresh plow tracks meant direction, meant someone else had already faced the storm and carved a safe line through it. Meant I wasn't alone out there. I pulled out slowly, tires crunching into the newly packed snow. The tracks were clean, sharp-edged, still shedding powder. Whoever made them had passed minutes ago. I followed without thinking too hard about where they led. The town dissolved behind me almost immediately. Streetlights faded into pale ghosts, then vanished altogether. Snow swallowed sound. Even the engine felt muted, like it was running underwater. The van's headlights tunneled forward, illuminating nothing but falling white and the dark grooves of the plow tracks ahead. I kept my eyes locked on those tracks. They were my anchor. My proof that this road still existed. Every few minutes, I'd catch the faint echo of the plow again. Metal on ice, distant but present. It kept me moving, kept me from noticing how the road had begun to slope, how the trees thinned out on either side, how the world felt wider and more exposed with every 100 yards. I told myself the nurse lived farther out than I remembered, that the plow was probably clearing the river road before doubling back, that the unease creeping into my stomach was just fatigue, not instinct. Denial is a quiet thing. It doesn't argue. It just smooths over the rough edges of thought until everything feels acceptable. The cold found its way in through the door seams. I could feel it crawling along my boots, stiffening my toes. The van smelled like old coffee and damp wool. Familiar smells. Safe smells. I focused on them, on the hum of the heater, on the steady line ahead. The plow track slowed. That was the second thing I ignored. They didn't stop abruptly. They just softened. The grooves shallowed, snow drifting back in as if the machine ahead had eased off the throttle. I eased too, my footlight on the gas, heart ticking a little faster now. The sound of the plow faded. Not gradually, just gone. 1 second there, the next swallowed by the storm. I rolled to a stop. Silence pressed in, broken only by the wind scraping snow across the van's sides. The headlights illuminated an open expanse ahead. No trees now, no buildings, just white stretching into dark. I stepped out of the van, the cold hitting me like a slap. The ground beneath my boots felt wrong, too flat, too open. The wind carried a dampness that didn't belong to frozen land. I walked forward a few steps, following the tracks until my stomach dropped. They ended. Not turned, not faded. Ended. Right at the edge of a frozen river. The ice was dusted with fresh snow, smooth and unbroken, except for the final, undeniable imprint of the plow blade. No tire marks beyond. No signs of turning around. Just a clean stop, like the machine had driven straight into the dark and vanished. My breath fogged thick in front of me. I stood there too long, staring, waiting for something to make sense. The river made a sound beneath the ice, a deep, distant groan, slow and patient, the kind of sound that reminds you how thin the barrier really is. I backed away slowly, every step deliberate, afraid that if I moved too fast, the ground would give up on me. When I reached the van, I locked the doors without remembering doing it. Inside, the warmth felt artificial now. Insufficient. The headlights seemed too weak, their beams dissolving uselessly over the riverbank. I told myself the plow must have turned off its lights, that the storm erased the turnaround marks, that the records would show it had been running all night. I didn't believe any of it. The phone buzzed again. Marlene, where are you? My fingers hovered over the screen. I couldn't bring myself to tell her, couldn't explain why I'd followed something that no longer existed. That was when I heard it. A distant engine, diesel, slow, approaching. From behind me. The sound crawled under my skin, not because it was loud, but because it was wrong, too steady, too deliberate, and getting closer. I looked in the rearview mirror, heart pounding, waiting to see headlights break through the snow. There were none, just the sound, growing louder, closer, circling. And that was when I realized the tracks behind me were already filling in, the storm erasing the only path I had left. The sound didn't belong to the storm. That was the first certainty I had. Wind screamed in bursts, uneven, frantic. This engine was calm, methodical. It moved with intention, not weather. I sat frozen, hands locked around the steering wheel, breath shallow enough that the windows barely fogged. The sound circled somewhere beyond the veil of snow, close enough that I could feel it more than hear it, a vibration settling into the van's frame. I twisted in my seat, peering through the rear windows, willing the darkness to give me something solid. Headlights, shadows, anything that proved this was real. Nothing appeared. The engine sound stopped. The silence afterward was worse. It felt staged, like the pause before a reveal. My pulse thudded so loudly I was sure it could be heard outside. I told myself to move, reverse, turn around, do anything. But the idea of backing blindly into a whiteout, towards something I couldn't see, felt just as dangerous as staying put. The river groaned again, deeper this time, a long, patient complaint from beneath the ice. The sound carried through the soles of my boots, through the metal floor, straight into my chest. I grabbed my phone, fingers numb, and typed back to Marlene. Delayed, bad visibility, stay inside. She didn't respond right away. The engine came back. Closer now, too close. I flinched as if something had slammed into the van, but there was no impact, just the low churn of machinery moving slowly through snow. I leaned forward, forehead nearly touching the windshield, scanning for movement. Then I saw it. A shape passed through the edge of the headlight's reach. Not light, not shadow, but absence. A darker cut in the snow, tall and rectangular, the suggestion of a blade. No cab, no lights, just the idea of a plow moving through space where one should not be. My mouth went dry. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Another vehicle without headlights, snow playing tricks on depth perception, exhaustion warping my senses. But none of those explained why the shape moved without sound for a moment, why it seemed to glide rather than roll. The engine note shifted, dropping lower, like it was idling just beyond sight. I turned the key hard, engine roaring louder than I meant it to. The headlights flared brighter as I threw the van into reverse. Snow crunched beneath the tires, resistance thick and uneven. I backed up slowly, terrified of hitting something hidden, watching the riverbank slide out of view. The plow tracks ahead were gone now, erased so completely it was like they'd never existed. Behind me, the road was a blank sheet of white. The engine sound surged. This time it was unmistakably behind me. The rear of the van jolted. Not a hit, but a pressure, like something heavy passing close enough to displace air. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering, and the engine sound cut out again. I sat there shaking, hands trembling on the wheel, listening to my own breath rasp too loud in the small space. The smell inside the van had changed. The familiar coffee and wool were overwhelmed by something colder, metallic, like old ice and oil. My phone buzzed. Ethan? Marlene's message was just my name, no punctuation. No context. I typed back with stiff fingers, "Don't come outside. I'm turning around." I didn't tell her why my eyes kept darting to the mirrors, why I felt watched, not by something with eyes, but by something aware of my movement, my hesitation. I eased the van forward, choosing a direction at random, trusting instinct more than logic now. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the snow, revealing nothing familiar. No signs, no landmarks. Just endless white and the suggestion of darkness pressing in from all sides. The temperature dropped suddenly, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had opened a door to something deeper and colder. Frost crept along the inside edges of the windshield, spiderwebbing outward. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow thuds against the side of the van. Not loud, not frantic. Measured. I froze again, every muscle locking. The knocks came again, same rhythm, same spacing. They sounded too deliberate to be the wind, too solid to be snow sliding off the roof. I didn't look. I stared straight ahead, eyes burning, whispering to myself that whatever was out there couldn't get in if I didn't acknowledge it. That fear fed things. That silence was protection. The knocks moved. Now they came from the rear door. Same pattern. 3. Pause. 3. My breath caught in my throat. Images crowded my mind. Someone stranded, desperate, freezing. Someone needing help. That was the conflict that tore at me, the one that always had. I'd spent years helping strangers just enough to avoid looking too closely at myself. Turning away now felt like a betrayal of the person I pretended to be. "Go away," I whispered, the words barely audible. The engine started outside, right next to the van. The whole vehicle vibrated as something massive idled inches away. Snow slid down the windows in sheets, revealing nothing but white glare. I squeezed my eyes shut as the sound rose, machinery straining. Then the knocking stopped. The engine revved. The van lurched sideways, shoved by an invisible force. Cabinets rattled. Something crashed to the floor behind me. I screamed, a raw, involuntary sound, and stomped the gas. The tires spun, then caught. The van surged forward, fishtailing wildly. I fought the wheel, heart in my throat, as the headlights bounced over uneven ground. The engine sound chased me, always just out of sight, always close enough to feel. I don't remember choosing the road back toward town. I only remember the moment the first streetlight broke through the storm, glowing dim and yellow like a promise. The engine sound faltered, then faded, as if it couldn't or wouldn't follow me past that boundary. I didn't stop driving until I reached the clinic parking lot, tires screeching as I slammed into a space. I sat there, sobbing, forehead on the wheel, my body shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Marlene stood under the awning, wrapped in her coat, eyes wide. She ran to the van as I stumbled out, nearly collapsing into her. "What happened?" she asked, voice trembling. "You look like you saw." I couldn't answer. I just shook my head, staring back down the road I'd come from, half expecting to see tracks forming on their own. The storm eased by morning. Snowplows ran as scheduled, clearing roads that showed no sign of what I'd seen. When I asked about overnight operations, the town records were clear. No plows had been running at 3:12 a.m. Not that night, not on that road, not ever. I left Musoni 2 days later. Drove south until the air felt breathable again, until the silence stopped sounding like it was waiting for me. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and I hear a distant engine in the snow, I remember how easy it was to follow something that looked like help, how quickly relief can turn into a trap. And I wonder how many tracks I didn't see that night, how many others ended at the river, believing they were being guided home. I didn't stop thinking about that night when I crossed the provincial line. I didn't stop thinking about it when the snow thinned, when the trees grew taller and closer again, when gas stations started appearing every 50 miles like reassurance made of concrete and light. Fear like that doesn't fade with distance. It follows. It settles into habits. It waits. For a long time after Moosonee, I kept driving only in daylight. I told myself it was practical, like that winter roads demanded respect. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. I didn't trust the dark anymore. Not because of what might be in it, but because of what I might follow. The van carried the memory like a smell you can't wash out. Every rattle of the heater sounded wrong. Every distant engine tightened something in my chest. I'd wake up in rest stops with my heart racing, convinced I could hear knocking on the doors, 3 slow thuds that existed only in my head and somehow felt more real than anything outside. Weeks passed, then months. Life resumed the shape it always does. Work, movement, small conversations that never touched the center of things. I didn't tell anyone what really happened. Not Marlene, not coworkers, not the strangers who shared campfires with me and talked about weather and road conditions like they were neutral facts. Because the more I thought about it, the more I understood that the danger hadn't been the storm or the river or even whatever had followed me out there. The danger had been how badly I wanted to believe I was being helped. That realization came back to me one night in northern Minnesota, late February, parked at a snowed-in campground that should have been closed but wasn't. The air was still, too still. The kind of quiet that feels padded, like the world has wrapped itself in insulation. I sat inside the van, engine off, listening. Far away, miles maybe, I heard it. A diesel engine. Low, steady. My body reacted before my mind did. My hands started shaking. My pulse climbed into my throat. I didn't move. I didn't look for tracks. I didn't step outside to confirm what I was hearing. I stayed exactly where I was and let the sound exist without attaching meaning to it. It passed or faded, or maybe it was never meant for me at all. That was when I finally understood the lesson Moosonee had carved into me. Slow and deep. Fear isn't always about threat. Sometimes it's about temptation, about the urge to surrender responsibility to something that looks authoritative enough to trust. Snowplows are symbols where I come from. They mean safety, infrastructure, someone working through the night so others don't have to. They mean the road ahead has been considered, cleared, made passable. That night on the riverbank, my instincts had tried to speak up. Not with panic, but with quiet questions. Why here? Why now? Why no lights? And I'd silence them because the alternative was harder. Stopping, sitting with uncertainty, instead of moving forward blindly. I still think about the nurse sometimes, about how close I came to asking her to follow me, to step into that whiteout because I believed I was already being guided. The weight of that almost choice sits heavier than the fear ever did. Town records said no plow ran that night, no operator signed in, no fuel logs, no radio traffic. Officially, nothing unusual happened. But unofficially, quietly, people avoided the river road for a while after that. I noticed it when I checked maps later and looked forums and local chatter under the excuse of curiosity. Mentions of bad ice, weird sounds, visibility issues. No one said more than that. They never do. I sold the van the following spring. Not because I stopped loving the road, but because I needed to change the shape of how I moved through the world. I needed doors that didn't rattle, windows that didn't frost from the inside, walls thick enough to keep certain sounds out. Even now, years later, I'm careful about what I follow. I don't trust fresh tracks unless I see them being made. I don't assume help is coming just because I want it to. And when the night offers direction too eagerly, when relief shows up before logic, I stop, I wait. I let the storm pass on its own terms, because some paths don't lead forward. They just end. at the edge of something cold and patient, waiting for you to decide how badly you need to believe you're not alone. And if there's one thing that winter taught me, standing on the riverbank at 3:12 a.m., staring at tracks that shouldn't exist, it's this. Survival isn't always about finding the way out. Sometimes it's about refusing to take the road that was never meant to be there at all. The first thing I remember noticing was the silence, how it didn't feel empty, but crowded, like something was holding its breath alongside me. My name is Ethan Mercer. I was 38 years old that fall, and I'd been living on the road in my old Volkswagen Rialta for nearly 3 years by then. Not because I was chasing freedom the way people imagine, but because stillness had started to feel dangerous after my divorce. Movement was safer. Movement kept my thoughts from catching up to me. Campgrounds, back roads, forgotten towns, those places let me disappear just enough to breathe. Hazleton wasn't supposed to be one of those places. I'd pulled in just before dusk, October air already sharp enough to sting my lungs. The campground sat on the edge of town, close enough to hear the distant hum of a highway, but far enough that the forest pressed in from all sides. Spruce and cedar stood so tightly together they blocked out the sky, their tops swaying like they were whispering to one another. My VW ticked softly as the engine cooled, a familiar, comforting sound. Home for the night. At 9:47 p.m., the temperature dropped fast, faster than it should have. I remember checking my dash clock because the cold felt intentional, like a switch had been flipped. That's when I noticed none of the nearby rigs had porch lights on. Not off for the night, never turned on at all. No folding chairs, no coolers, no signs of people settling in. Just RVs parked in quiet rows, dark windows reflecting trees. It felt less like a campground and more like a storage lot for abandoned lives. I told myself it was late season camping. Locals who knew better, folks who kept to themselves. Denial is a skill you sharpen on the road. I stepped out to stretch, boots crunching over gravel that sounded too loud in the quiet. The air smelled wrong. Not rot, not smoke, but something metallic, like old coins left in rainwater. I walked toward the restroom building, and that's when I saw the sign taped crookedly to the door. Doors stay unlocked, for your safety. No logo, no explanation, just those words, handwritten in thick black marker. I laughed once, short and nervous, the sound swallowed immediately by the trees. Thought it was a joke, a weird small-town prank. But inside the restroom, every stall door stood open, no locks. The hooks had been unscrewed from the walls, leaving pale scars in the wood paneling. I didn't stay long. Back at my RV, I noticed movement near the site next to mine. An older man stood outside his motorhome, smoking with the intensity of someone trying to burn time instead of tobacco. His eyes flicked toward me, then away, then back again. "Evening," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. He exhaled smoke through his nose. "You passing through?" "Just the night." A pause stretched between us, thick as fog. Finally, he nodded toward my door. "Don't lock it." I smiled, reflexively. I usually do. That's when he looked straight at me. His eyes were bloodshot, but alert, afraid in a way that hadn't dulled into panic yet. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Whatever it is doesn't use doors." I wanted to ask what, but something in his posture told me the answer wouldn't help. He flicked his cigarette into the dirt and went back inside, leaving his door wide open behind him. That should have been my cue to leave. Instead, I closed myself into the Rialta, pulled the curtains, and locked the door out of habit. The click sounded loud, final, like a challenge. Inside, the RV felt smaller than usual. The walls seemed thinner, the ceiling closer. I made soup on the stove, the hiss of propane almost too comforting, and tried to ground myself in routine. Spoon, bowl, steam fogging the window above the sink. That's when I smelled it again, stronger now, that metallic tang mixed with something sour like wet fur left too long in a basement. I told myself it was the forest. At around 10:30, a sound drifted through the campground. Not footsteps, not wind, something slower, a dragging scrape, rhythmic, circling. Gravel shifting under weight that didn't hurry. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. My chest tightened. I'd heard animals before, bears, moose, coyotes. This wasn't that. This sound paused too often, like it was considering options. Then came the knock. Not on my door, above me. A single deliberate tap against the RV's ceiling. I froze. Every muscle locked, breath shallow enough to hurt. The knock came again, slightly to the left this time. Nails, or something like them, scratching just enough to leave a sound, but not enough to tear through. I stared upward, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Probably branches," I whispered, even though there were no trees close enough to reach the roof. The scratching continued. Slow, curious, moving. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and that's when I noticed the message notification I'd missed earlier, sent from an unknown number. "Don't look up." My phone buzzed again almost immediately. It knows when you do. A third buzz. Unlock the door. I didn't remember giving anyone my number. The scratching stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing inside my ears. Minutes passed, maybe seconds. Time felt slippery, unreliable. Then the ceiling creaked. Not from weight, but from pressure. Like something pressing down, testing the material, finding weak points. The smell intensified, filling the RV until my eyes watered. I stood slowly, legs numb, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. Right above my head. Not loud, not rushed, controlled, patient. I thought about the sign, about the missing locks, about the man's eyes. My phone buzzed again. Last chance. I reached for the door, fingers trembling over the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed at me not to open it, not to give whatever was outside permission. But another part of me, the tired, worn-down part that had been running for years, just wanted the pressure to stop. The scratching resumed, sharper now, faster, angry. Something shifted on the roof, moving toward the front of the RV, and I realized with sudden clarity that it wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to make me come out. I unlocked the door. The scratching stopped instantly. Cold air flooded in, carrying the smell with it, thick and suffocating. The campground lay silent, rows of open RV doors like mouths frozen mid-scream. No movement, no shapes, just darkness pressed tight between the trees. Behind me, above me, the ceiling let out a soft, satisfied creak. I stepped down onto the gravel, heart hammering, and that's when I felt it, something warm drip onto the back of my neck. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I didn't wipe the back of my neck. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, frozen on the gravel, letting whatever had landed on my skin cool in the night air until it felt less like liquid and more like a film. My body understood something my mind refused to accept, that sudden movements were invitations. The cold bit through my jacket, sharp and immediate, like the night had teeth. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something shifted its weight. Not a step, a repositioning. The kind you make when you're settling in to watch. I took one slow breath through my nose and nearly gagged. The smell was worse out here, stronger. It clung to the back of my throat, metallic and sour, layered with something old, like a closed room no one had entered since the owner disappeared. My phone buzzed in my hand again, the vibration so sudden it nearly made me drop it. Good. That was all the message said. I didn't type back. I didn't dare unlock the screen again. The light felt dangerous, like a flare. I slid the phone into my pocket and focused on the ground in front of my boots, keeping my eyes level with the horizon, never up. The gravel crunched softly behind me. Not footsteps. Too light for that. More like fingers brushing stone. I started walking. I didn't run. Running would turn this into a chase, and I knew, without knowing how, that whatever was here didn't rush. It waited. It herded. Panic was something it fed on later. The campground road curved gently toward the main lot, a wide open space where the office building sat dark and locked, windows boarded over from the inside. Every RV I passed had its door open. Some had lights on inside, dim and yellow like night lights left for children who never came home. I caught glimpses of movement inside a few of them. Curtains twitching, shadows shifting just out of sync with the light. People awake, watching. No one speaking, no one helping. The The sound followed me, not behind, not above anymore, but alongside. A soft scrape that matched my pace exactly. When I slowed, it slowed. When I stopped, it stopped. I reached the edge of the lot and finally looked toward the trees, not up, just forward. That's when I saw the scratches. They weren't on the RVs out here, they were on the ground. Long, shallow grooves cut into dirt and gravel, looping in overlapping circles, all of them oriented inward, like the campground was the center of a ritual that never ended. Some of the scratches were fresh, the dirt still piled at the edges. Others had filled with rainwater, reflecting the stars in broken lines. My mouth went dry. A voice spoke from my left, low and urgent. "Don't stand still." I turned just enough to see a woman standing in the open doorway of a fifth wheel, her hair pulled back tight, face pale in the interior light. She didn't wave me over. She didn't smile. She just held eye contact like it was a lifeline. "Come inside," she said, slow. I moved toward her, every step measured, my skin buzzing like it was charged. As I crossed the threshold, something passed behind me, close enough that the air shifted. The smell surged, then faded. She closed the door, but didn't lock it. Inside, the RV felt crowded, not with furniture, but with tension. 2 other people sat at the dinette, a man and a teenage boy, both silent, both watching me like I might be contagious. "I'm Mara," the woman said quietly. "We don't ask last names anymore." I nodded. My throat refused to work. She handed me a towel. "Your neck." I wiped carefully, then looked down. The towel came away streaked with dark, oily residue that shimmered faintly in the light, like it didn't quite agree with the color spectrum. It smelled worse up close. "What is it?" I asked. Mara shook her head. "It sheds. Mark's territory. Sometimes people." The boy swallowed hard. The man at the table finally spoke. "You locked your door, didn't you?" It wasn't an accusation, just fact. "Yes." A long exhale went around the room. "First-timers always do," he said. "Instinct, privacy, control." My chest tightened at the last word. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. Mara glanced toward the ceiling, then back to me. "Since the disappearances. People thought it was animals at first. Then people started vanishing from locked homes. No signs of entry, just gone. After a while, folks realized the ones who survived had one thing in common." "Unlocked doors," I said. She nodded. "It doesn't like barriers, doesn't understand them, but it understands invitation." A soft tap sounded on the roof. Every person in the RV flinched in unison. The tap came again, closer to the center this time. Nails, or whatever they were, scratched lightly, testing. The boy covered his ears. "It's early," he whispered. "It usually waits until later." Mara's jaw tightened. It followed him. My stomach dropped. The scratching grew firmer, tracing slow arcs above us. The ceiling bowed inward slightly, just enough to notice. Dust drifted down from the vent. I felt something brush against my ankle. I looked down. A thin, dark line had seeped through the seam of the door, creeping inward across the floor like a living shadow. It split, branched, then stilled. The smell surged. "Out," the man said suddenly, standing. "Now. All of us." Mara didn't argue. She grabbed the boy's hand and pulled him toward the door. "It won't press if there's no one inside. It doesn't take empty spaces." The scratching intensified, angry now, faster, overlapping. We stepped out together into the cold, standing in a loose circle in the open lot. The RV behind us creaked as pressure released, like something disappointed. Above, something shifted, then slid off the roof with a wet, heavy sound that made my skin crawl. I kept my eyes forward, but in my peripheral vision, I saw movement. Tall, wrong, unfolding itself near the tree line. Not stepping, not crawling, but reorienting, like it was deciding which shape fit best. "Don't look," Mara whispered. "It mirrors attention." The air grew colder, breath fogging thick and fast. The smell wrapped around us, invasive, intimate. Then it spoke. Not out loud. Inside. A pressure behind my eyes, a thought that wasn't mine. "You were lonely." My knees nearly buckled. "You left doors open long before you came here." Images flashed, empty houses, late-night drives, the way I never unpacked fully, never stayed long enough to belong anywhere. This is just honesty. Something brushed my arm, not skin. Something colder, textured, like wet bark. The boy cried out. Mara shouted, "Move to the road." We ran. This time, running was allowed. Gravel flew under our feet as we bolted toward the highway, and the darkness behind us alive with sound, scraping, sliding, a wet rush like something large moving too fast through undergrowth that shouldn't have allowed it. I didn't look back. The road lights appeared like a promise, sodium yellow and humming. As we crossed the boundary from dirt to asphalt, the sound behind us cut off abruptly, like a cord pulled from a wall. We stumbled to a stop, gasping. The campground lay silent behind us. Too silent. Mara bent over, hands on her knees. "It won't cross." "Why?" I asked between breaths. She straightened slowly. "Because roads are decisions, and it only lives in the spaces where people don't choose." I looked back once. Just once. At the edge of the trees, something tall folded itself inward, retreating, its outline blurring as if it was losing definition without us there to define it. The smell faded. The cold eased. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Someone else's problem, someone else's night. We stood there until dawn. None of us went back. And even now, years later, every place I stay, every door I pass through, I remember Hazleton and how safety isn't about keeping things out. Sometimes it's about knowing what happens when you invite the wrong thing to notice you. Dawn didn't arrive so much as it crept in, thin and gray, like it was afraid of what it might find if it showed itself too fully. We stood along the shoulder of the highway while the sky slowly lightened, the four of us spaced apart as if closeness might invite something back. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping over us, but none slowed. From the road, we probably looked like just another group of stranded travelers, an inconvenience, a story someone might mention later without detail. Hazleton stayed behind us, quiet and unchanged. No smoke, no movement, no sign that anything had ever been wrong there at all. That was the worst part. When the sun finally cleared the tree line, Mara let go of the boy's hand. He looked older in the daylight, his eyes rimmed red, face slack with exhaustion. The man, his father, I realized, put an arm around him without speaking. No one cried. There was nothing left in us for that. "State police won't do anything," Mara said eventually. Her voice was flat now, scraped clean of panic. "They'll write it up as hysteria or wildlife. They always do." I nodded, though my head felt stuffed with cotton. My thoughts kept circling back to the sensation of that voice inside me. Not sound, not language exactly, but recognition, like it had known me before I ever arrived. "What happens now?" I asked. Mara looked at me for a long moment. "Now you leave. You don't camp alone for a while. You don't ignore that feeling when a place feels unfinished." She hesitated. "And you don't talk about it like it's a story." I thought of my YouTube channel, of the way I framed fear into neat arcs, tidy lessons, digestible dread. I felt something sour twist in my stomach. "I won't," I said. And I meant it. We parted without exchanging numbers, without promises to check in. That felt intentional, like staying connected might keep a door open somewhere it shouldn't be. I walked back to my Rialta alone, heart hammering with every step, half expecting the smell to return, the air to press down again. But the campground was empty now. Every RV was gone. Not packed up, gone. No tire tracks, no disturbed gravel, just clean, untouched ground like nothing had ever been parked there at all. Even the scratches were gone, the dirt smooth and unbroken. My VW sat exactly where I'd left it, the only object that looked real. I stood there for a long time before opening the door. When I didn't step inside right away. I waited, listening, scanning the ceiling, the trees, the corners of my vision. Nothing. I drove out of Hazleton an hour later, hands tight on the wheel, mirrors checked obsessively. The road unwound ahead of me, familiar and comforting, but something fundamental had shifted. Movement didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like avoidance. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep indoors. Every ceiling felt too close. Every creak sounded intentional. I started choosing campsites with no trees, no overhangs, nothing above me but open sky. I stopped locking my doors, not out of fear, but out of respect, like acknowledging a rule I didn't make but had learned the hard way. And sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself listening for sounds that weren't there, scraping, breathing. That patient pause that meant something was deciding. I told myself it was trauma, adrenaline residue, the mind's way of replaying danger to stay sharp. That worked. Until Vancouver. I was parked outside the city limits, killing time before meeting a friend. Urban campground, clean, well-lit, surrounded by concrete and chain-link fence. The kind of place where nothing like Hazleton should exist. At 11:13 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Still moving. My chest tightened. I didn't reply. I turned the phone off and shoved it into the glove compartment like that could make a difference. Above me, the ceiling popped softly as the temperature shifted. Just a sound, I told myself. Metal contracting. Normal. Then came the smell. Faint. Distant. Like a memory trying to reassemble itself. I stepped outside into the cold city air, heart racing, eyes scanning the lot. Nothing moved. Cars sat in neat rows. Lights hummed. Traffic murmured beyond the fence. And yet the feeling persisted. That pressure, that sense of being regarded. That's when I understood the lesson Hazleton had tried to teach me. It was never about doors. It was about thresholds, about the spaces we leave unfinished, the parts of ourselves we don't examine too closely because moving feels easier than facing what waits when we stop, the places where we tell ourselves we're just passing through, that nothing can follow if we don't settle. Some things don't need permission in the way we understand it. They just need you to keep running. I got back into the Rialta and drove until dawn, city lights giving way to dark highway, then to pale morning sky. I didn't stop until exhaustion forced my hands to shake on the wheel. When I finally parked, I chose a place with no history I knew of. No stories, no disappearances. Just empty land and wind and the honest sound of nothing watching. I slept with the doors unlocked. Years have passed since then. I still travel. I still camp. I still tell stories, but not like before. I don't frame fear as entertainment anymore. I let it be what it is, a signal, a boundary, a reminder. Because some nights when the road stretches long and the world feels thin, I swear I can smell metal on the wind. And when I do, I don't check the locks. I check myself. I ask whether I'm listening. And I remember Hazleton, how a whole town learned the hard way that safety isn't about keeping monsters out. It's about knowing when you've already let one inside. The first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was the cold realizing I was alive. Cold that didn't just touch skin, but pressed inward through boots, through bone, through memory. The kind of cold that doesn't rush you, it waits. It convinces you to slow down, to stay still, to listen. My name is Ethan Rowe. I was 34 that winter, living out of a battered Volkswagen Eurovan. I'd rebuilt myself, chasing the kind of quiet you can't find in cities anymore. I'd spent years RV camping across the northern United States, Montana, Minnesota, the Dakotas. But that February, the road carried me farther than usual. Past the border, past familiarity, all the way up to Churchill, Manitoba, a place people don't visit by accident. Churchill is where the land stops pretending it's friendly. A town balanced between tundra, forest, and frozen sea. A place where the silence has weight, where locals lock their doors not just against people, but against animals that can peel steel like fruit. I told myself I was there for the aurora. That's what I said whenever anyone asked. But the truth was messier. I was running from a kind of grief that doesn't announce itself, the slow kind, the kind that hums in your chest when the engine's off. I parked the van just outside town, near the edge of the Churchill River, its surface frozen solid and pale under moonlight. There were signs posted, weathered, blunt, almost bored in their warning. Do not walk on the river at night. No exceptions. The locals said it casually, like a rule you'd repeat to a child. Don't walk the river after dark, not because of thin ice, not because of animals, but because things move under it. They laughed when they said that part, which bothered me more than if they'd stayed serious. That night, February air knifed through every seam of the van. The heater groaned like it resented being awake. I sat inside wrapped in a wool blanket, listening to the wind rake across the ice when I saw the first light. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Maybe the moon, fractured by snowdrifts, maybe someone's flashlight from town. But it was wrong. The light was beneath the ice. A pale blue glow slid slowly under the frozen river, steady and deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. It didn't flicker, didn't scatter. It moved with intention. I held my breath without realizing it. I told myself it was scientific, bioluminescence, some rare Arctic phenomenon I'd never heard of. My brain reached desperately for explanations because the alternative required admitting that something was watching from below. I stepped out of the van. The cold slapped me awake, sharper now, almost angry. My boots crunched against snow as I walked closer to the riverbank, the light still gliding beneath the ice, silent and smooth. Then another appeared. Then another. 3 lights now, all moving independently, tracing slow arcs beneath the surface. They weren't random. They weren't drifting. They were circling. I wasn't alone. A few figures stood farther down the bank, locals bundled tight, faces hidden behind scarves and fur-lined hoods. They didn't speak. They just watched. I approached one of them, a man maybe in his 50s, eyes pale and tired. I asked what it was. He didn't look at me when he answered. "They come some nights," he said. "Not every winter, but enough." "What are they?" I asked. He shrugged. "Don't matter." That answer landed heavier than any explanation could have. The lights continued their slow dance, illuminating cracks in the ice from below, veins spidering outward like the river itself was alive. The air smelled metallic, sharp, like ozone before a storm. My fingers burned despite thick gloves, numbness creeping in. One of the locals, a woman, whispered something in Cree I didn't understand. Another crossed himself, and then one of the lights stopped, directly beneath the ice, directly beneath a man standing on the river. I hadn't noticed him at first. He was farther out than the rest of us, standing alone on the frozen surface, maybe 30 yards from shore. No flashlight, no rope, just a dark silhouette against the ice. Someone shouted at him. The wind stole the words. The man didn't move. The light beneath him brightened. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic yet, but recognition. The kind you get when your body understands a threat before your mind does. The ice beneath the man began to glow faintly, a thin halo spreading outward, cracks whispering softly like fingernails dragging across glass. The sound was subtle but wrong, too rhythmic, too deliberate. The locals started backing away. I stayed frozen, torn between shouting and running, my instincts warring with disbelief. This wasn't how danger was supposed to look. There was no roar, no sudden violence, just a quiet, methodical pressure building from below. The man on the ice finally moved. He looked down, and whatever he saw made him scream. The sound cut through the night, sharp and raw, echoing across the frozen river. He stumbled backward, boots slipping, arms flailing. The light followed him. Not fast, not slow, patient. I shouted then, my voice cracking, telling him to run, to crawl, to spread his weight, but my words felt useless, swallowed by the cold and the dark. The ice groaned. A deep, resonant sound rolled beneath our feet, vibrating up through my legs into my spine. The river answered with a crack so loud it felt like a gunshot. The man fell. The light surged upward, pressing against the ice directly beneath him, illuminating his terrified face from below. For a split second, I saw his expression, mouth open, eyes wide, pupils blown with terror before the ice gave way. The river opened its mouth and swallowed him. The light vanished with him, plunging the surface back into darkness. No splash, no thrashing, just silence. The locals didn't scream, didn't run. They turned and walked away, one by one, like this was confirmation, not surprise. I stood there long after they were gone, my breath coming in ragged clouds, the river dark and still again as if nothing had happened. The cold finally reached my lungs. I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear alone, but from something deeper. A fracture in certainty, a crack in the belief that nature is indifferent. Because whatever was under that ice had chosen him, and it knew we were watching. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the Volkswagen with the engine idling, eyes fixed on the frozen river, every shadow feeling too close, every sound too deliberate. At 11:58 p.m., just before the aurora should have started, the lights returned. Closer this time. The lights didn't rise this time. They slid sideways, slow and smooth, beneath the ice, drifting closer to the bank where my van sat idling like a nervous animal. I remember thinking how quiet the engine sounded suddenly, how small. The wind had died down, and without it, the cold felt heavier, more deliberate, as if the night itself had leaned in to listen. I told myself to leave. That was the smart thing. That was what every instinct I'd ever trusted was screaming at me. Instead, I shut the engine off. Silence fell so hard it felt physical. The ticking of hot metal cooling echoed inside the van, loud as footsteps. My breath fogged the windshield in uneven bursts as I watched the river. The lights moved in a loose line now, 3 again, spacing themselves evenly, like they were mapping something, like they were measuring distance. I cracked the driver's door open just enough to hear. That's when I noticed the sound beneath everything else. A low vibration. Not a hum exactly, more like pressure, as if the ice itself was under strain, not cracking yet, just being tested. The sound crawled up my legs through the frozen ground, settling somewhere deep in my chest. I stepped out again, against every rational decision I'd ever made. The smell hit me first, sharp and sour, like old iron and stagnant water. It didn't belong to winter. It belonged to something trapped, something sealed away too long. I walked closer to the riverbank. Careful now, each step measured. My headlamp cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, illuminating frost-coated rocks and brittle reeds frozen mid-bend. The lights paused, all 3 of them. They hovered beneath the ice directly in front of me, just a few yards out, close enough that I could see the texture of the frozen surface glow faintly, veins of white and blue crisscrossing like a nervous system. I knelt down, pressing a gloved hand to the ice. It was warm, not melting, just warmer than it should have been, like skin under blankets. I jerked my hand back, heart slamming so hard I tasted copper. My brain scrambled for explanations again, thermal pockets, geothermal activity, anything, but the lie collapsed under its own weight. The light closest to me brightened, and then it knocked. 3 dull thuds came from beneath the ice, evenly spaced, reverberating up through the frozen river and into my bones. Knock, knock, knock. Not random, not natural, intentional. I stumbled backward, slipping on packed snow, catching myself against a rock. My headlamp beam wobbled wildly, dancing across the ice as the knocking repeated, louder now, closer together. A memory surfaced then, uninvited. My father teaching me Morse code as a kid, tapping patterns on the kitchen table, teaching me that rhythm meant communication. The knocking stopped. The lights drifted apart, forming a rough circle beneath the ice. In the center, darkness pooled, thicker than the night around it. The ice there looked thinner, somehow, stretched. I realized then that the man who died earlier hadn't been chosen at random. He'd been standing alone. I wasn't. Not anymore. A crunch sounded behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, headlamp beam snapping onto a figure standing near the tree line. A young guy, maybe late 20s, bundled up, eyes wide. "You see it too?" he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. "I heard something," he said. "From the river. Thought it was, I don't know. His voice broke off as the ice beneath the lights pulsed again. He took a step forward. "No," I said, finding my voice too late. "Stay back." But curiosity has gravity. It pulls harder the more afraid you are. He edged closer to the bank, boots sliding slightly on the ice. The lights responded immediately, drifting toward him, tightening their circle. The vibration returned, stronger now, a steady thrumming that made my teeth ache. "Back up," I said again, louder. "Please." He hesitated, torn between fear and disbelief. I saw the exact moment denial lost. His eyes widened as something shifted beneath the ice, a shadow moving against the light, large and indistinct, like a shape pressing up from below. The ice creaked. A hairline crack formed, racing outward from the center of the circle. The guy panicked then. He turned to run. The light surged. The crack exploded outward with a sound like tearing fabric, and the ice beneath him collapsed. He screamed as he fell, arms flailing, fingers scraping desperately at the edge. I ran. Not away, from him. I hit the ground hard, sliding on my stomach, reaching out with everything I had. My gloves brushed his sleeve as icy water swallowed his legs. Something moved beneath him, fast now. The water glowed brighter, illuminating his face from below, and for a split second I saw what was under there. Not a creature. Not exactly. More like depth. Endless depth. A vertical darkness that didn't belong in a river that's shallow, like the ice had opened onto something far deeper than water. His grip slipped. I screamed his name, though I never learned it, and then he was gone, pulled straight down, light and darkness collapsing together as the ice sealed itself shut with a violent crack. I lay there, chest heaving, face pressed into snow that burned like fire. The lights vanished again. Silence returned, heavier than before. I crawled back toward the van, not standing until I reached solid ground, every nerve screaming. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice trying to start the engine. When it finally roared to life, the sound felt obscene, too loud for what I just witnessed. I drove. I didn't look back. I left Churchill before dawn, tires crunching over frozen roads, the sky slowly lightening behind me. I drove until my eyes burned, until the heater couldn't keep up, until the town was nothing but a memory gnawing at the back of my mind. Weeks later, safe back in the States, I tried to explain it away, hypothermia, shared panic, optical illusions, anything. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm parked alone at a campground and the world goes quiet, I feel that vibration again, that low, patient pressure. And I remember what the locals said. They come some nights, not every winter, but enough. I didn't stop driving until the sun was fully up, until daylight flattened the world into something manageable again. Even then, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale blue glow trailing beneath the road, sliding just under the surface of everything I thought was solid. I told myself borders mattered, that whatever lived under that river stayed there. That belief lasted exactly 3 nights. I was camped alone in northern Minnesota, a small, half-forgotten campground tucked against a frozen lake. The kind of place that doesn't make brochures, no hookups, no other rigs, just snow, trees, and the sound of ice shifting in the dark. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the feeling that something was wrong. Not a noise, not a dream. Just that old instinct, the one I'd ignored in Churchill, that quiet internal pressure telling me I wasn't alone in the way I thought I was. The van was cold, too cold. My breath fogged instantly, and when I checked the heater, it was dead. No warning lights, no clicks, just silence. Then I felt it, that vibration, faint, almost polite, humming up through the ground and into the frame of the Volkswagen, not strong enough to rattle anything, just enough to be noticed if you were already listening. I sat up slowly, heart hammering, every sense sharpening. Outside, the lake was frozen solid, moonlight reflecting off its surface in dull silver waves. Beautiful. Harmless looking. Until I saw the light, one single glow, pale and blue, moving beneath the ice near the center of the lake. My mouth went dry. I didn't step outside this time. I didn't tell myself stories. I knew better now. I watched through the windshield as the light traced a slow, deliberate path toward shore, toward me. The smell came next, metallic, sour, completely out of place. It seeped into the van like it was finding cracks I didn't know existed. I pressed a hand to my chest, breathing shallow, fighting the rising panic. Knock. The sound came from beneath the van, not loud, not violent, just enough to be unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. The same rhythm. My hands shook as I reached for the keys, but before I could turn them, the light beneath the ice stopped, directly below where the shoreline met the frozen lake, directly below me. The vibration intensified, no longer subtle. The van's frame creaked softly like an old ship settling. Frost on the windshield began to melt in thin branching lines as if heat was rising from below. I thought of the men who disappeared, of the locals who didn't shout, of the way the ice had opened like a mouth and closed again without leaving a scar. And finally, I understood the real warning. It wasn't about walking on the river. It was about standing still. I turned the key. Nothing. The knocking came again, harder this time. The van rocked slightly, just enough to make my stomach drop. I imagined the ground beneath me thinning, stretching, revealing that impossible depth I'd seen under the river. I grabbed my coat, my boots, my phone, left everything else, and kicked the door open. The cold hit like a wall, stealing my breath, but fear carried me forward. I ran. Not far, just far enough. Every step felt like betrayal, like leaving something behind that wanted to keep me. Behind me, the ice cracked. A sound like a tree splitting echoed across the lake, followed by a deep, resonant groan. The ground shuddered, and for a horrifying second, I thought the earth itself was giving way. I didn't look back until I reached the tree line. The lake was dark again, silent, whole. My van sat untouched at the edge of the shore, engine dead, windows fogged from the inside. Nothing appeared broken. Nothing ever does. By morning, the heater worked. The lake looked ordinary. No cracks, no lights, no evidence. I left that campground at sunrise and didn't stop until I reached a rest area packed with other travelers. Noise, engines, voices, proof of life, layered thick enough to drown out whatever listens in quiet places. It's been years since then. I still live on the road, still camp, still chase the kind of silence that first pulled me north. But I've learned the difference now between healthy solitude and dangerous stillness. I never camp on frozen water. I never ignore posted warnings. And when the night goes too quiet, when the cold feels patient instead of sharp, I leave. Because some parts of this country don't want to be explored. They want to be respected. And some things beneath the surface aren't hunting. They're waiting. Waiting for the moment you convince yourself that the rules don't apply to you. Waiting for you to stand alone long enough on something you assume is solid. The road teaches you a lot if you survive it long enough. And one of its hardest lessons is this: not every light is meant to guide you. Some are only there to let you know you've been seen. The first thing that went wrong was the silence, because silence in the Yukon is never empty. It's waiting. My name is Caleb Hargreaves. I was 39 that winter, and I had convinced myself that cold could be managed the same way fear could. Layer up, keep moving, don't let it settle in your bones. I'd been living out of my old Volkswagen LT camper for almost 4 years by then, drifting between seasonal jobs and long stretches of road where nobody asked me who I was or why I stayed gone so long. The VW wasn't pretty, but it was honest. Manual heat controls, a radio that crackled instead of lied, and a body that complained loudly before it failed. I trusted it more than most people. Dawson City in December isn't a place you end up by accident. The town sits like a half-remembered dream at the edge of the world. Old gold rush buildings leaning into the cold, streets that creak under packed snow, the Yukon River frozen solid and holding its breath. I'd pulled into a small unofficial camping pullout just outside town, a place locals tolerated but didn't advertise. No hookups, no lights, no sound except wind scraping ice across metal. I remember telling myself I'd only stay one night. At 2:05 a.m., the heater clicked off. That alone wouldn't have mattered. The VW's heater had moods, but when it stopped, the radio turned on. I hadn't touched it. The dial glowed a weak amber, casting just enough light to show my breath fogging the windshield. Static hissed for a moment, then resolved into a voice, flat, measured, professional in the way only emergency broadcasts ever are. This is AM 670, weather advisory for the Klondike region. I frowned, pulled my sleeping bag tighter, and reached for the knob. The plastic was cold enough to bite. The volume didn't change. The voice continued. Severe wind conditions expected within the next 30 minutes. Temperatures dropping rapidly near zero. I glanced at the windshield. The night outside was still, moonlit, sharp, no wind, no falling snow, just trees standing like dark witnesses. I told myself it was a replay. Old stations up north sometimes looped warnings when nobody bothered to shut them down. I'd heard that before. Ghost broadcasts. Nothing supernatural, just neglect. The voice paused, then added, "Residents advised to secure loose items, ensure all doors are properly sealed." That line hit me wrong, not because it was threatening, but because it was intimate, like it knew I was listening alone. I finally managed to shut the radio off by cutting the power entirely. The interior lights died. The heater stayed silent. The cold rushed in like it had been waiting its turn. I lay there telling myself stories about faulty wiring, about northern infrastructure held together with duct tape and hope. I told myself I was tired, that fear gets creative when you're half asleep in sub-zero temperatures. Then the radio turned itself back on. Same station, same voice. This advisory applies to the residents located off the Old Dome Road pullout, the voice said calmly. My stomach tightened. Old Dome Road wasn't a guess. That's where I was parked. I sat up, heart thudding loud enough that I was sure the sound carried outside. The smell inside the van shifted. Cold metal, stale coffee grounds, and something else, faint but unmistakable, ozone, like overheated electronics. This structure appears inadequately insulated, the voice continued. Occupants should consider relocating to a safer environment. I shouted into the dark, "That's not funny." My voice sounded thin, like it didn't belong to me. The radio crackled, then the voice returned, closer somehow. Occupant is awake. That was the moment denial failed me. Up until then, I could have explained everything away with enough effort. But that sentence wasn't a warning, it was an observation. I yanked on my boots, fingers clumsy, nails burning as blood rushed back into them. The VW groaned as I shifted my weight, metal contracting in protest. Outside, the temperature hovered around -40. Leaving the van wasn't just scary, it was dangerous. The radio kept talking. Interior temperature falling, it said. Heater failure confirmed. How do you know that? I demanded, louder now, anger flaring to cover fear. Who's running this station? Static. Then a soft click, like someone leaning closer to a microphone. This station has been decommissioned since 1997. The words landed heavy, sinking through me. I knew the history. Half the AM stations up here died when funding dried up. Towers left standing like rusted crosses against the snow. My hands trembled as I tried to restart the engine. The key turned. The starter coughed once, then nothing. Outside, something moved. Not footsteps, too light, too irregular, more like the sound of snow sliding off branches, except there was no wind. I froze, listening. The environment pressed in, the cold sharpening every sound until my own breathing felt too loud. Occupant heart rate elevated, the radio said. Stress response detected. I slammed my fist into the dashboard. Pain bloomed, sharp and grounding. Stop. The voice didn't respond immediately. When it did, the tone changed, still calm but lower, almost gentle. Remaining inside may increase risk, it said. Exterior conditions currently stable. That contradiction twisted something in my chest. Stable didn't mean safe. Up here, stability was a lie you told yourself before everything changed at once. I cracked the door open just an inch. The cold sliced in, brutal and alive. The smell of snow, clean metallic, flooded the van. I scanned the tree line, nothing moved, no lights, no shapes that didn't belong. Behind me, the radio whispered, door opened. I slammed it shut and locked it, breath coming fast now. Panic climbed my spine, hot against the cold. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by awareness, like the night itself had tuned in. This broadcast is for your safety, the voice insisted. Please remain calm, Caleb. Hearing my name felt like falling through ice. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. I paid cash. I kept to myself. That was the rule. Isolation was protection. Unless something else had been listening all along. The heater coughed, sputtered back to life, then surged too hot, blasting air that smelled burnt and wrong. The windows fogged instantly. I wiped the windshield with my sleeve and saw it then, frost forming on the inside of the glass, creeping outward in delicate, fast-growing veins. Temperature imbalance detected, the radio said. Structural stress increasing. I realized, with a clarity that scared me more than the cold, that the station wasn't predicting the storm. It was narrating me. Every choice I made, every second I hesitated, it folded into the broadcast like it had always been part of the script. I shut my eyes, fighting the urge to bolt blindly into the dark. Fear makes liars out of instincts if you let it. I needed one clear thought, one decision that was mine. The radio crackled again, and the voice delivered its final line before the signal dipped into static. Next advisory will begin when the occupant exits the vehicle. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd heard all night. I sat there, shaking, knowing that staying meant freezing, and leaving meant stepping into something that already knew my name. The door handle felt warm in my palm, and that was wrong. Wrong enough that it snapped me into a sharper kind of awareness, the kind you get when your body realizes the rules have changed without telling your mind. Metal doesn't hold heat like that at -40. It gives it up instantly. I pulled my hand back, flexed my fingers, and listened. The radio stayed silent. That silence pressed harder than the voice ever had. It felt deliberate, like the pause before someone finishes a sentence you already know you won't like. Outside, the night had thickened. The moon was gone, swallowed by cloud cover that hadn't been there minutes ago. The trees beyond the windshield were no longer individual shapes, just a dark mass breathing together. I told myself I'd open the door, step out, assess, and get back in. That was the plan. Simple plans keep panic from improvising. The moment I unlocked the door, the radio clicked once, just a single mechanical sound like a throat clearing. I stepped down into the snow. The cold hit me like a physical thing, not a temperature but a weight, slamming the air out of my lungs. My boots sank with a soft crunch that sounded obscene in the quiet. The smell out there was sharper than before, tinged with something sour beneath the clean ice, old fuel maybe, or rust carried on the wind from somewhere far off. Behind me, the van ticked and popped as metal contracted, a dying animal sound I'd heard 100 times before. But layered beneath it was something else, a low hum, electrical, steady. I turned slowly, scanning the pullout. No lights, no movement. The road was just a darker strip of snow leading back toward town, 5 miles away. 5 miles might as well have been 50 in that cold. Exterior temperature stable, the radio said from inside the van. I flinched hard enough that my balance wobbled. The voice was muffled now, filtered through steel and glass, but unmistakably present. It hadn't needed the door open to know where I was. I backed away from the van, boots crunching, eyes never leaving it. Frost crept across the windshield from the edges inward, fast now, like time-lapse footage. The radio dial glowed brighter, pulsing faintly, as if responding to my distance. "Please remain within audible range," the voice added. That did it. Anger surged up, raw and reckless. "You don't get to tell me where to stand," I snapped, my breath tearing out in white bursts. The wind picked up then, not a storm, not yet, but enough to make the trees sigh together, branches rubbing like knuckles, cracking. Snow lifted from the ground in thin sheets, skating across the surface. The road behind me blurred, its edges dissolving. I took another step back. The radio volume increased, not louder in a mechanical way, but clearer, like it was adjusting itself to account for distance. The hum grew stronger, vibrating faintly through the snow under my boots. "This advisory is ongoing," the voice said. "Deviation from recommended proximity may result in loss of guidance." Guidance. The word crawled under my skin. I thought of all the times I'd trusted maps that were wrong, people who smiled too easily, instincts I'd talked myself out of. Up here, you survived by respecting the environment, not arguing with it. And right now, the environment was speaking through an abandoned radio station that knew my vital signs. I turned toward the road and started walking. Each step was an argument with my own fear. My legs wanted to run, but running meant sweating, and sweating meant death later. So I walked fast, controlled, counting breaths. 10 steps in, the wind strengthened again, pushing at my chest, needling exposed skin through my jacket seams. Behind me, the radio followed. Not the van, the sound. It carried across the open space, riding the cold air with impossible clarity. The voice was no longer confined to the speaker. It felt ambient, like it was coming from everywhere at once. "Occupant increasing distance," it noted calmly. "Visibility decreasing." It was right. The trees faded further. The road dissolved to white on white. I could still see my footprints stretching back toward the pullout. But already the wind was softening their edges, erasing proof that I'd been there at all. That thought hit me harder than the cold. Erasure. The Yukon had a way of swallowing things without ceremony. Cabins, equipment, people. If you weren't careful, you didn't leave a story behind. You just stopped being mentioned. A new sound cut through the wind. Static, but not from the radio. This was external, crackling faintly, like electricity discharging into open air. It pulsed in time with the hum I'd felt underfoot earlier. My boots vibrated with it now, a subtle tremor that made my teeth chatter even when my jaw was clenched. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the voice spoke again, closer than ever, right at my ear level despite there being nothing there. Thank you for complying. I spun around, heart slamming, hands raised uselessly. There was no one, just snow, trees, dark. But the sense of proximity lingered, like someone had just stepped back out of my personal space. What do you want? I asked, and hated how small it sounded. The answer came after a pause long enough to feel like consideration. Continuation. The word echoed, not audibly, but internally, bouncing off memories I hadn't touched in years. Nights spent driving just to avoid stopping, radios filling silence so I didn't have to think, the way I'd learned to let external noise drown out internal ones. I realized then that I'd always used sound as a shield. Music, engines, voices. Silence meant reflection. Reflection meant things I wasn't ready to face. The wind surged again, harder this time, shoving snow into my eyes, my mouth. The cold found new gaps in my clothing, biting deep. Somewhere in the whiteout, metal groaned, a long, distant moan that could have been trees bending or something else entirely. Storm conditions beginning, the voice announced, as predicted. Predicted, not caused. That distinction mattered somehow, even as panic tightened my chest. The storm hadn't been summoned for me, I'd just been early. My fingers were numb now, clumsy. I tried to turn back toward the van, toward shelter, but my footprints were gone. The pullout was gone. The world had flattened into a spinning tunnel of white. Guidance required, the voice said softly. A thin beam of light cut through the snow ahead of me. Amber. Steady. The same color as the radio dial. I stared at it, every instinct screaming trap, and felt the unbearable weight of choice. Follow the light, trust the thing that had been watching me, or stay put and let the cold decide for me. The light pulsed once, patiently. Behind it, barely visible through the storm, I thought I saw the outline of a structure. Tall, skeletal. A radio tower, maybe, its red warning lights long dead. The hum under my feet intensified, syncing with my heartbeat. Signal strength optimal, the voice said. Proceed. I took a step toward the light. Fear and necessity tangled so tightly I couldn't tell them apart anymore, knowing with a sick certainty that whatever waited at the source of that broadcast had been waiting a long time, and that it had never signed off because it had never finished listening. The light didn't move as I walked toward it. That should have reassured me. Fixed points usually do, but the longer I stared, the more it felt like the distance between us wasn't shrinking so much as agreeing to let me approach. Every step was a negotiation. The storm thickened until the world narrowed to a tunnel barely wider than my shoulders. Snow stung my face like thrown sand. My eyelashes crusted over, each blink an effort. The hum beneath my boots became a constant vibration now, traveling up my legs and into my spine, as if the ground itself were wired. I kept my eyes locked on the light because looking anywhere else made me dizzy. The sense of scale was gone. No horizon, no depth, just white pressing in from all sides. The environment had stopped being a backdrop and started behaving like a living thing, closing ranks. Progress confirmed, the voice said, no longer sounding like it came from any direction at all. It felt internal now, resonating behind my forehead. Signal integrity maintained. I clenched my jaw and focused on breathing through my nose, slow and controlled. Panic wastes heat. Panic makes mistakes. I'd learned that the hard way years earlier in a different place, a different cold. That memory tried to surface, bringing with it the familiar ache of guilt, but I shoved it down. Survive first. Feel later. The shape ahead resolved slowly, painfully, as if the storm resented giving it up. A tower, just like I'd thought, tall, skeletal, latticework coated in ice so thick it looked grown rather than accumulated. No lights blinked on it, but the amber glow pooled at its base, spilling from a small, low building half buried in snow, the abandoned station. My stomach dropped. I hadn't realized how much I'd hoped the source would be something else. Anything else. A ranger outpost. A stranded vehicle. Even a hallucination would have been easier to swallow. The door to the building stood open, not blown open, not broken, open in the careful way of something left that way on purpose. Shelter available, the voice said. Interior conditions favorable. I stopped 10 feet short of the threshold. The air smelled different here. Old dust, oil, and a faint metallic tang that reminded me of blood on cold iron. The hum was strongest now, vibrating the snowdrifts, rattling something loose inside my chest. Why me? I asked, the words tearing out of my throat. There are other people. Dawson City is right there. The pause that followed stretched too long. This frequency requires a listener, the voice finally said. You were receptive. The answer landed with quiet cruelty. Receptive. I thought of all the nights I'd driven with the radio on just to avoid my own thoughts. All the times I'd chosen noise over silence because silence let memories talk back. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a final, deliberate click. The room was smaller than I expected, walls lined with outdated equipment, consoles, dials, meters frozen in mid-measurement. Everything was coated in a fine layer of frost, except for the central broadcasting desk. That was clear, warm enough that condensation beaded on its surface. A single microphone stood upright, its red on-air light glowing steady. The storm noise vanished the instant the door closed, replaced by a deep, enveloping quiet broken only by the low electrical hum. It felt like stepping underwater. This station has been awaiting continuation, the voice said, now unmistakably coming from the microphone. Broadcast interruption occurred unexpectedly. I approached the desk, despite every instinct screaming not to. My fingertips hovered inches from the metal surface, feeling heat radiate upward. What interruption? I asked. Listener loss, the voice replied. Fatal exposure, December 1997. My throat tightened. I didn't want to ask the next question, but it forced its way out anyway. How long were they here? Long enough to be heard, the voice said. The implications settled over me like frost. This place didn't trap bodies. It trapped attention. It fed on presence, on awareness, on someone willing or forced to keep listening. The meters on the wall flickered to life, needles twitching. One was labeled signal, another listener engagement. The second needle crept upward as my heart rate climbed. You don't need me, I said, backing away. You can shut down. The hum deepened, almost a growl. The station does not sign off. The lights dimmed, then brightened again, pulsing in time with my breath. The temperature in the room rose uncomfortably fast, my parka suddenly too heavy. Sweat prickled at my neck, dangerous in this cold. Please, I said, and hated myself for it. I just want to leave. Another pause. Longer this time. Continuation requires exchange, the voice said. Information for information. A memory surfaced then, uninvited, the reason I kept moving, the reason I never stayed anywhere long. A night years ago when I'd ignored a warning, chosen speed over caution, and left someone else alone in the cold while I drove on. I'd survived. They hadn't. My chest ached like it always did when I let myself remember. You already know, I whispered. Yes, the voice agreed. But acknowledgement strengthens the signal. The needle on listener engagement spiked. I realized then what this place wanted. Not my life, not my body. It wanted my attention, my guilt, my willingness to stay present with the thing I'd spent years running from. The broadcast wasn't about weather or warnings. It was about keeping someone listening long enough that they forgot to leave. I reached for the microphone. The metal burned my fingers, but I didn't let go. I leaned in, heart hammering, and spoke, not to the station, but to the silence I'd been avoiding for years. I know what I did, I said. I know why I ran, and I'm done letting it decide where I stop. The hum wavered. The lights flickered violently now, consoles sparking, meters swinging wildly. The voice distorted, layers overlapping, as if multiple broadcasts were trying to speak at once. Signal instability detected, it said, no longer calm. Listener resistance increasing. I ripped the microphone from its stand and smashed it against the desk. Sparks flew. The on-air light went dark. For one terrifying second, everything stopped. Then the storm came back all at once. The howl of wind, the scream of ice against metal, the cold crashing into the room as the door burst open. I didn't wait. I ran. The tower behind me shrieked as I sprinted into the white, collapsing and metal twisting like something alive and wounded. The hum died with it, cut off mid-note, like a breath stolen away. I didn't stop running until the lights of Dawson City broke through the storm, warm and human and real. Hours later, safe and shaking in a heated room, I turned on a radio out of habit. AM 670 was dead air, just static, and for the first time in years, I let it stay that way. The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was how wrong the morning felt when sound refused to show up. My name is Elliot Ward. I was 38 that spring, and I'd been living on the road long enough to trust routines more than instincts, which in hindsight was my first mistake. I'd driven my old Volkswagen Westphalia, white paint faded into something closer to bone, up the eastern edge of Nova Scotia chasing quiet coastal campgrounds, the kind where mornings smelled like wet pine and salt and you could hear dogs barking before you ever saw a house. That's what drew me to Guysborough. Small town, working harbor, friendly faces, dogs everywhere, or at least there used to be. I pulled in late the night before, parking just outside town near the shoreline, a spot locals used when visiting relatives or launching boats at dawn. The tide was out, moon low, the Atlantic stretched flat and dark like it was holding its breath. I slept with the rear hatch cracked open, listening for the usual chorus, wind through spruce, distant buoys clanking, the occasional bark drifting across the water. Nothing came. At 6:30 a.m., I woke up not to noise, but to its absence. No gulls, no engines, no dogs. Just my own breathing, too loud in the van. When I stepped outside, the air felt heavier than it should have been, thick with cold and something sour underneath, like seaweed left too long in the sun. The town sat still, houses lining the road with curtains drawn, yards empty. Every porch had a dog bowl, every fence had scratch marks, and every dog, as I would soon learn, refused to step outside. I didn't know that yet. I just knew something felt off, the way your body knows before your brain catches up. I walked toward the harbor, boots crunching on gravel that sounded sharper than it should have. I passed a yellow house with a sagging porch where a black Labrador pressed its face against the window, eyes wide, unmoving. I waved. It didn't blink. Not a sound, no tail wag, just staring like it was watching something I couldn't see. At the dock, I met Harold, a man in his late 60s with hands like driftwood and eyes permanently squinting against wind that wasn't blowing. He was loading traps onto a boat that hadn't been in the water for days. When I asked him why, he laughed once, sharp and humorless. "They won't go out," he said, jerking his chin toward town. "Dogs know better." That was the first time someone said it out loud. Over coffee at the only diner open, I learned the rest in fragments. It started 3 days ago. One dog refused to leave the porch, then another. By the end of the day, every dog in town was silent. No barking, no whining, no growling. They'd press themselves into corners, under beds, behind couches. If forced outside, they'd freeze, dig in, teeth bared, not aggressive, but terrified. People tried to explain it away. Bad weather coming, coyotes, a sickness in the water. But the weather stayed calm. No carcasses turned up, and the dogs stayed inside. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I was just passing through. That's the lie I leaned on hardest. I spent the morning checking my van, topping off water, tightening a loose bolt on the exhaust. Every task felt louder than it should have. Metal clanging, echoing down empty streets. The silence pressed in, not peaceful, but expectant, like a held note stretched too long. Around noon, the smell came back, stronger now. Low tide exposed the shoreline, dark mud streaked with kelp and something else I didn't recognize. The odor wasn't rot exactly, it was coppery, warm, wrong. I walked closer, heart thudding, and that's when I saw the tracks. They weren't fresh, but they were deep, too deep for any animal I knew. Each impression pressed into the wet sand like it had weight behind it, intention. They came from the water's edge and moved inland, cutting across the beach toward the trees. Not dragged, not staggered. Deliberate. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make them make sense. Bear? No, the stride was off. Moose? Too narrow. I crouched, touched the edge of one print. The sand was cold, but beneath it, faint warmth lingered like something had passed recently enough to leave a memory behind. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, drifting from the tree line. Not a howl, not a call. More like breathing, slow, rhythmic. As if the forest itself was inhaling. I backed away, every instinct screaming, but my brain fought back hard. I told myself it was wind through branches, the way it can sound like anything if you're already on edge. I told myself the dogs were spooked by something mundane. I told myself I was tired. Denial is a powerful thing when the alternative feels too big to name. By late afternoon, the town felt tighter, like it was shrinking. People moved quickly, heads down, doors locked. I noticed fresh scratches on siding, low to the ground but wide, as if something had brushed past repeatedly. The dogs inside the houses watched through windows, eyes tracking something outside that never showed itself. I decided to leave at dawn the next day. That was the plan. Sleep one more night. Head west. Forget this place. I parked closer to town than I should have, telling myself it was safer. The sun dipped behind the trees early, shadows stretching long across the road. As darkness settled, the silence deepened. Not even insects dared to fill it. Inside the van, I lay awake, listening. The smell seeped in through the vents, stronger now, mixed with damp earth and iron. My skin prickled, temperature dropping despite the heater. I wrapped myself tighter in my sleeping bag, heart pounding, every small noise amplified. Then came the sound of movement outside, slow, heavy, not footsteps exactly, more like weight shifting, testing the ground. It circled the van once, twice. I held my breath, afraid even that might give me away. The dogs in town stayed silent. Not a single bark, not a whimper. A shape passed the frosted window, too tall to be a person, too fluid to be anything else. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting seconds, waiting for the sound to fade. It didn't. Instead, it stopped right behind the van. And then from somewhere close, too close, I heard a low exhale, warm against the metal, as if whatever it was had leaned in to smell me. I didn't sleep after that. I waited for morning, watching the pale gray light creep through the windshield, every muscle locked, every thought narrowed to one desperate hope, that whatever had walked in from the sea had already moved on. But when dawn finally broke and I stepped outside, the tracks were back, fresh this time, circling my van before turning inland again, deeper into town. And every dog behind every window watched them go. I stood there long after the engine should have been running, my hand resting on the cold metal of the van door, staring at those fresh tracks as if they might rearrange themselves into something explainable if I gave them enough time. They didn't. They cut through town like a decision already made. I told myself to leave. That was the smart move. I had fuel, daylight, no reason to stay. But fear doesn't always push you away from danger. Sometimes it roots you in place, convinces you that understanding is safer than ignorance. I wanted context. I wanted someone older, someone local, to tell me I was misreading things. So instead of turning the key, I followed the tracks. They led past the diner, past the harbor, straight through backyards that smelled of turned soil and wet wood. In one yard, a child's red plastic sled lay overturned, clawed deeply down the center as if something had tested its strength and found it lacking. Curtains twitched as I passed. No one came out. No one called to me. The town felt like a room where everyone was pretending not to hear the same noise. At the edge of town, where pavement gave way to dirt and spruce closed in tight, I found Harold again. He was standing by his truck, shotgun resting against the door, eyes fixed on the tree line like he was waiting for it to blink. "You shouldn't be here," he said without looking at me. I told him about the tracks around my van. His jaw tightened, the skin around his eyes pulling taut. "It came back last night," he said. "That's why they stayed quiet." I asked him what it was. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into his truck and pulled out a folded map, edges soft from use. He pointed inland, past old logging roads, past places no one camped anymore. "Used to be dogs here too," he said. "Years back. They went quiet first. Then people started losing sleep, hearing things, smelling the tide when it wasn't out." He finally looked at me then, eyes sharp. "You ever notice how animals don't scream when they know it won't help?" That question lodged somewhere deep and stayed there. By midday, the tension snapped. It started with a scream, human, high, raw, ripping through the town from somewhere near the school. Doors flew open. People ran. Dogs howled then, just once. A sound so full of terror it raised the hair on my arms before cutting off abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. I ran too, following the sound, heart hammering. Near the playground, I saw a woman collapsed on the ground, hands over her ears, sobbing. Her dog's leash lay slack beside her, collar snapped clean in half. The grass around them was flattened in a wide arc, crushed down toward the woods. No blood, no body, just absence. Panic spread fast after that. Phones came out, calls went unanswered. Someone said the RCMP had already been notified days ago. Someone else said they never came. The smell grew stronger, clinging to clothes, to skin, like it wanted to be carried. By late afternoon, the town decided to leave. Not officially, no announcement, no plan, but in the way animals migrate when the air changes. Cars packed, trucks loaded. People didn't look back. I loaded my van too, hands shaking, telling myself this was finally it. Time to go. As I pulled onto the road, something in me twisted. Not fear for myself, but dread of what was being left behind. The dogs still inside houses, the empty streets, the thing that had learned the rhythm of this place. The road out ran close to the woods. Halfway down it, my engine sputtered. I coasted to a stop, heart in my throat. I turned the key, nothing. The silence rushed back in, thick and absolute. I sat there, breathing shallow, every sense straining. From the trees, branches shifted. Not wind, weight. I didn't run. I couldn't. I stayed frozen in the driver's seat as the forest opened just enough for something to step forward, not fully, not into clear view, but enough for me to understand why the dogs had gone quiet. It was tall. Too tall. Its outline bent wrong, joints moving with a patience that felt practiced, and the smell, strong now, washed over me, metallic and warm, carrying the ocean and the earth and something old beneath it all. It tilted its head, listening. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Seconds. Minutes. Then, somewhere far off, a car backfired. The sound cracked the moment open. The thing recoiled, not afraid but irritated, and slid back into the trees with a fluid grace that made my stomach drop. My engine roared back to life on the next turn of the key. I didn't question it. I drove. I didn't stop until the sun was low and the air felt lighter, cleaner. Only then did my hands start shaking. I pulled over, vomited onto the gravel, and sat there until my breathing slowed. I left Guysborough behind that day. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when the world gets too quiet and the air carries a hint of salt where it shouldn't, I think about the dogs, about how they knew silence was survival, about how some places aren't haunted by ghosts, but by things that listen, learn, and wait. And I wonder if the tracks ever stopped leading inland, or if they're still there, pressing deeper, patient as the tide. I didn't realize how far the silence had followed me until weeks later, when I woke up in another campground hundreds of miles away and felt that same pressure in my chest, the sense that sound was being rationed, that the world was holding something back. I kept driving after Nova Scotia, crossing into New Brunswick, then Maine, telling myself distance was the cure. But fear doesn't obey geography. It settles into habits. I started noticing things I never had before, the way dogs reacted to my van, how they'd stiffen when I parked, how their owners would laugh it off while tightening the leash just a little more than necessary. I smelled the ocean in places that shouldn't have had it, copper and brine clinging to the air long after I'd left the coast. Sleep became a negotiation. Every night I replayed the sound of that breathing against the metal of my van, warm and deliberate, like it had been memorizing me. I told myself it was over. I told myself it had stayed in Guysborough, bound to that shoreline, that silence. But something in me knew better. Whatever it wasn't trapped. It was territorial. And territories change. The realization hit me hardest in a quiet campground in northern Maine, tucked deep into pine forest where the air should have been alive with insects and wind. Instead, it was still. Too still. At first, I welcomed it. Then I noticed the dogs. There were 3 RVs parked nearby, each with a dog. None of them barked, not when their owners laughed, not when doors slammed. They lay close to the ground, ears flat, eyes fixed on the trees. I felt my throat tighten. I packed up without finishing dinner, heart racing, the lesson from Guysborough screaming back into focus. Animals don't stay quiet without a reason. I left before dark. That became my rule after that. If the dogs went silent, I went too. No debate, no curiosity. I learned to trust fear the way you trust pain when your hand gets too close to fire. I stopped camping near shorelines, stopped parking near dense woods, stopped telling myself I needed to understand everything I encountered. But understanding came anyway. Months later, I met a retired wildlife officer in a Montana campground, a man who'd spent decades tracking things most people only saw once. Over a shared bottle of cheap whiskey, I told him about Guysborough, not the details, just the silence, the tracks, the smell. He listened without interrupting, eyes dark. "There are things," he said finally, "that don't want to be seen. Not because they're rare, but because they've learned it's safer that way. They don't hunt like animals. They don't haunt like ghosts. They wait. They move when the tide's right." I asked him if he thought they could travel. He nodded once. Everything that eats learns how. That night, I dreamed of the shoreline again, of tracks leading inland, always inland, never back to the sea. I woke up with the taste of metal in my mouth and the certainty that fear wasn't something to conquer. It was something to listen to. I still live on the road. I still camp. But I choose differently now. I listen more. When the world grows quiet in the wrong way, I leave without apology. I don't need proof anymore. I don't need to see it again. Because I believe this now, with every part of me that survived that morning. Silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's the only mercy you're given before something decides you're worth noticing. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the dogs won't bark, where the air smells like the tide even when the water's far away, don't wait to understand why. Leave. Before the silence learns your name.